So thank you. Welcome everybody. Quite a lot of people. And I think we have a hard job to do. I will take you on a journey of at least, I think, 1 hour. So be focused, but of course, enjoy it. Please. Everything is ready. Is the sound good for you? Yes? Okay. Esteemed members of the board, dear fellow professors and researchers, teachers, students and staff of ArtEZ, interested persons from my field, designers, artists, inventors, scholars, policymakers and entrepreneurs, dearest family, fools and friends. It is truly a great honor for me to have the opportunity to deliver my inaugural speech here in your presence. In higher vocational education, it is becoming a tradition to dress up the appointment of professors, as with professors at university, like a ritual initiation. However, I hope that this speech is not regarded as a poor imitation of a university lecture. I see it as an opportunity to speak to our wider audience about the value of research at an art school in general, and of the new professorship, E-SCAPE in particular. A public statement of accountability, not only to my fellow professors, but also to the ArtEZ community, for the professional field and society. If I choose point something, yes, it works. Art education in the Netherlands occupies an unusual position in higher vocational education. It has never felt comfortable with an orientation towards artists as professionals with a regular profession. More than 20 years before Henk Bergdorf called for a Dutch faculty of the arts on behalf of art education, various academy directors argued that the arts were entitled to practice what they termed pure artistic research, beside what was then called pure scientific research. The separation between science and art, between thinking and doing, between fundamental research and creative application, which artists felt to be unnatural, is now being removed. Scientific thinking and artisanal making are strongly interwoven. Or as Leonardo da Vinci put it, all knowledge which ends in words will die as quickly as it came to life, with the exception of the written words, which is its mechanical part. I wish to take you on a journey that visits the concepts of I, we, think and do. On the basis of these concepts, I hope to make two things clear. First of all, my views on the type of research that I advocate in an art school. And second, the importance of this type of research by artistically motivated designers for people and society. Transition. Transition is one of the most frequently used words of this era. The only certainty we have today is that we are constantly changing. A society in transition raises the question of where people still feel physically and mentally at home. The unprecedented possibilities of today's technology make our daily lives take on a radically different dimension. Private and public, work and home, physical and virtual, local and global, These are concepts that are barely distinguishable in this new reality. Social and cultural changes also pose questions for our home and living environment. In an environment that is fluid and uncertain, more than ever, people cling to the basic requirements of life: shelter, protection, and identity. As biological creatures, people's first priority is to provide food, clothing, and a home, and the ingredients, materials, and tools necessary to prepare and make them. But besides being a homo faber, humankind is above all a homo semioticus, a man whose individual identity and that of the community is derived from a meaningful environment. The current complex society poses designers the essential question of how our living and working environment can be designed meaningfully. This is not an easy task. Despite our advanced technology and increasing scientific knowledge, we constantly struggle with issues that can no longer be solved from one area of expertise. Increasingly, we see that artists and creative thinkers are called upon for these so-called wicked problems. Apparently, they have something to offer, technology and science. Designers educated at art schools have developed a high level of sensitivity for the visual, material, cultural, and historical context in which people live in. This sensitivity makes them preeminently suited to act as an intermediary between people and things. Designers know better than anyone that they not only give shape to things, but that things also shape people. Design is less of a problem-solving activity than we think. Design creates objects that give us an opportunity to fulfill a function in a specific way. A spoon is not the ultimate solution for carrying liquid food to our mouth. We can also raise the bowl of soup directly to our mouth. Most chairs do not offer ultimate comfort. On the contrary, we adapt our way of sitting to the specific shape of the chair. With their bodies, eyes, ears, and hands, people are constantly negotiating with objects and the surrounding space. The designer is the most important mediator in these negotiations. Moreover, designers are trained to reframe existing ideas and to imagine new social scenarios that go beyond solving a concrete problem on behalf of a public or commercial organization. Louise Fresco, president of the board of Washington University and Research Center, calls artists and researchers professional, curious people, and ascribe the role of explorers to the first group and intensifiers to the second. Sometimes the roles are reversed, and artists and designers challenge researchers to, for instance, develop new materials and functions. Industry associations are also increasingly seeking collaboration with creative thinkers. The major challenges demands different approaches, in which creative thinkers, but above all, I think creative doers, play a crucial role. These days, concepts such as design thinking and design research are presented in many policy plans as a remedy for tunnel visions in the business world or for bureaucratized organizations. The expected side effect of this remedy calls innovation. Design thinking, however, quickly degenerates into mindlessly sticking colored pieces of paper to a board during brainstorm sessions in uninspiring rooms with low suspended ceilings and lukewarm coffee in plastic cups. Design research involves more than inviting scientists for a design task. But what does the artistically trained designer have to offer this complex and changing world as a design thinker and a design researcher? To answer this question, I want to take you back to my earliest childhood, a trip back to my young I. What you see here is the habitat of my youth, my father's studio. An environment in which I learned about the materials and technique of a visual artist. Clay, paint, and colored pencils were always close at hand. So did the etching press, the welder, and the kiln for ceramic products. The doing was not confined to the studio only. In the winter, my bedroom was strewn with Lego bricks. In the summer, I made huts, carved spinning tops from old table legs, or built a Canadian canoe with my own hands. An environment with all the characteristics of a domestic space. As art sociologist Pascal Gide calls the first of 4 areas that he identified in which the artistic practice develops. A space that is not limited to home, but which does have everything from a domestic space. A space in which parents, children, and friends maintain a confidential and intimate relationship. A space that allows experimentation and failure, where the singing can still be off-key, where air guitar and air drums are often played, and parents turn a blind eye to children scratching the tabletop. A space in which the world is discovered, collected, recorded, and arranged in the form of stones, shells, and coins. A space where the slowness of meditation and daydreaming prevails. This domestic space is beautifully described by the Italian designer Ettore Sottsass. Looking back on his childhood from his adult design practice, he writes, start quote, "When I was very small, a little boy of 5 or 6 years old, I was certainly no infant prodigy, but I did do drawings with houses, with vases and flowers, with gypsy caravans, merry-go-rounds and cemeteries, perhaps because the First World War had only just ended. And then, when I was a bit older, I built beautiful, sharp-pointed sailing boats carved with a penknife out of the tender bark of pine trees from Montebello. I also built a steamboat which sank immediately from wood and metal strips, and used a school friend's toy steam engine. Neither I nor the others consider ourselves designers, artists, craftsmen, or technicians in the service of the community. We were not looking for clients or spectators' approval or disapproval outside that of ourselves. Whatever we did, the reward was in the making itself, in the desire to make it." End of quote. The urge to do things and the will to materialize feelings and thoughts are the basis of the design practice. Everyone in this domestic space is a handy person, a craft person who does not consider his or her work as a means to a useful end, but as an end in itself. Craft as a pleasurable, practical, and integrating activity of the hand and heart, techniques and science, art and craftsmanship. Essayist Gerrit Krol argues that we only become unhandy when we enter a school system, where there is still, quote, "a primitive contempt of the head for the hands, where we place knowledge above ability. Moreover, we assume that everything we know is in our head, and that is not the case. End of quote. Cole shows us the reader the physical knowledge that a handy person develops in their childhood by learning to write and draw, to ride a bicycle and tie the shoelaces. In the domestic space, physical experience is central. Trial and error, or often in the literal sense, by falling down and getting up again. A form of knowledge that cannot be found in theoretical textbooks. Every parent, educator, or teacher knows that the verbal or written instructions alone are not sufficient. Here, the ancient method of imitatio applies, as it has always applied in all workplaces throughout the world. The master demonstrates and corrects, the apprentice imitates and improves. It is a form of learning by which the handy person, through much practice, develops tacit or embodied knowledge that the body will never leave. In the same way that we associate our brain with a cognitive memory for what we know, our body has a physical memory for what we are able to do. But is the craftsman I outlined here also a researcher? Let us limit ourselves to the domain of the domestic space, a space in which a sotsas contends. These concepts are as yet unknown. What we do and make in this space has the obvious of the everyday. In the domestic space we are bricoleurs and not engineers, in the sense that the cultural philosopher Claude Lévi-Strauss invests it with. The bricoleur feels at one with the surrounding world and works with whatever is available. Something breaks and we fix it with a plank of wood, nails and wire from the shed. We have a desire for play and adventure and therefore build a treehouse or a castle from wooden blocks. The engineer, on the other hand, is a modern scientist who has isolated himself from the world around him. He devises concepts, plans, blueprints to impose on the world that is meaningless to him. He is focused on a goal and sees his thought and actions as a means to achieve it. For the bricoleur, the making is a goal in itself. He makes use of the signs and meaning that already surrounded him, such as the tools and materials with which he works, and he derives his pleasure from the discoveries, random events, and unexpected combinations during the making process. This kind of wild thinking of the bricoleur has no specialism. This self-evident production and the use are typical of the so-called unself-conscious cultures in which stability, continuity, and social cohesion take precedence over change, innovation, specialization, and individualism. Communities in which the craft knowledge is passed from parents to children, from masters to apprentices. There is not yet a system in which the designer, as a specialist, has alienated himself from his public. The I still coincides completely with the we. For the bricoleur, the we has not yet become an anonymous and unknown public, or as Sotsas described his role as a designer in the consumer society, quote, "These days, I'm a professional acrobat, actor, tightrope walker for a public that I don't know and can hardly imagine. A public that I myself invent, that does not concern me and with which I have no contact, people whose talking, applause and disapproval I hear only as a muffled echo. In the domestic space, we are all the designer, artist, researcher, inventor, explorer, user, client, and consumer. We have no theory. We both possess and develop mainly implicit, embodied knowledge. In 1985, I enrolled as a design student at the art school in Arnhem. Anyone who goes as a domestic bricoleur to the communal space, the second space identified by Jeroen, where the praxis of the artistic practice develops, becomes caught up in a social domain where the head begins to dominate the hands, in which a separation between practice and theory is likely. Jeroen gives the classroom, workshop, or lecture hall of an art school as examples of communal spaces. Spaces that are distinct from the domestic domain due to the exchange of ideas between peers and professionals. The communal space is less free than the domestic space. The actions and thoughts of students are reflected upon from a professional attitude. In the literal sense, the bricolage is considered and criticized from the perspective of a future profession. The similarity between the two domains is the freedom to experiment. In both spaces, trial and error and wasting time and energy are desirable and essential elements of the learning process. This is in contrast to the other two domains identified by Jeroen: the civil space, in which our critical public assesses the deeds of the artist, and the market space, where art and artists are subjected to the economic principles of supply and demand. After 5 years at the academy, I found that the training was mainly practical in nature, and the theoretical training was limited to a few lessons of art history and philosophy. This was not a unique situation. Workshops and design studios are the core of design education at art schools. A strange observation, given that the art academy emerged in the 16th century as the institution where the craftsman could emancipate himself as an artist with scientific knowledge through theoretical training. But in the early 19th century, history created its own reflection by emancipating the artist, who mainly believed that becomes too isolated from society as a romantic genius, as a craftsman in the service of applied art. A direct consequence of this was the introduction of the workshop in arts and craft education between 1900 and 1913. In my situation, my father's studio in the domestic space was replaced by the workshop of the Arnhem Academy of the Arts in the communal space. But what did that transition mean for the relationship between thinking and doing, between practice, theory, and research? A workshop can take very different forms, from the medieval guild workshop and the 19th century Meisterklasse to the modern design studio. The guild workshop was the reference point for the 19th century arts and craft movement, a workshop in which no theoretical training took place. There, through the principle of imitatio, people learned both the practical skills and the design which was determined by the academically trained artist. Historically, there have been several attempts to document and transfer the knowledge of the guild workshop, such as the Encyclopédie of Diderot. Diderot was a scholar who went into the field like a modern anthropologist, to learn the specific characteristics of craftsmanship. In so doing, he encountered the problem of embodied knowledge that cannot be conveyed through words. He therefore decided to become an apprentice in a workshop to gain enlightenment through practice. The result was a meticulous visual documentation of craftsmanship. However, the encyclopedia was not intended as a practical handbook for designers. The documented knowledge was, after all, widely available. It was passed on from master to apprentice in the guild system. That was not the case when the English designer William Latterby published the first of the artistic craft series of technical handbooks in 1907. These handbooks were explicitly intended as handbooks for students who could no longer learn the craft through the guild system, which was abandoned in the late 18th century. Unlike the engravings in Diderot's encyclopedia, the illustrations in the artistic craft series functioned as instructional drawings. The handbooks can be seen as a body of knowledge for the design practice, or more precisely, for craftsmanship. The knowledge is instructive in nature and focused solely on acquiring skills. The books serve as a replacement for the guild masters. They are for makers and producers, not for designers and concept thinkers. Design principles are not described in the books. Only with the advent of the Bauhaus in 1919, a combination of an art and craft school, was a course created in which the artisanal and later also industrial production was linked to design theories. With its integrated practical and theoretical training, the Bauhaus workshop became the most important example for the contemporary international design academies. The craftsman's workshop is not only an environment characterized by the experience of embodied knowledge. The workshop also embodies a work ethic. Ever since the art and craft movement, craft has stood for honest handiwork. Essential to this ethic is that the designer retains control over the design and production process with his mind and hands. In the 1960s, the moral aspect of design was underlined by the first professor of industrial design in the Netherlands at the Delft University of Technology. In his inaugural speech, G.J. van der Grinten used the distinction between labor and work as defined by the philosopher Hannah Arendt. Labor is the necessary activity that human must perform to survive as a biological creature. Work is the ability that counteracts our unnaturalness and provides us the artificial things of our human household. In a mechanized and now also digitized and automated world, work is in danger of degenerating into labor. According to van der Grinten, the artist is, strictly speaking, only remaining full worker in a company of laborers. End of quote. Thus, it is not only the embodied knowledge that characterizes the modern craftsman, but also the way he works, maintaining control over the idea, material, production, sale, and use. In the current developments towards a circular and sustainable society, this means that designers also deal with waste disposal and the possible reuse of the materials. The new craftsmen of today are called Bas van Abel, or Tjeerd Veenhoven. They don't design products, but value chains in which ethical principles regarding humans and the environment are the main drivers. Design professors Kees Dorst and Brian Lawson attempt to identify the strengths and weaknesses of the contemporary Bauhaus-inspired workshop model. Like Gielen, they characterize the communal space of the workshop as a free space, in which, for example, time is unstructured and people are not bound by fixed lesson times. The studio constitutes a social working community in which ideas are freely exchanged between students and between students and teachers. This only works well when similar values and norms are applied within the community and there is not too much competition. The working method is informal, intuitive and experimental, and the practical exercises encourage the sharing of knowledge and experience. The workshop is the domain of the designer as a reflective practitioner who integrates his personal knowledge and experience into the design process. The domain in which human and material and human and technology are constantly interacting. The actions are not carried out according to an acquired theoretical framework, a method that philosopher Donald Schoen called as a reflective conversation with the situation. Dorst and Lawson also recognized drawbacks in the dominance of the workshop model. The strong focus on the workshop as a design studio makes the learning of instrumental skills and acquisition of specific knowledge a marginal activity. Something I experienced myself in my student days. A greater contrast between practice and theory was barely conceivable at that time. There was no relationship between the theory lessons and the workshop. And the main difference was, and still is, I think, that in the theory classrooms we always reflected upon everything that has been made and thought. Well, in the workshop of the Rietveld building, students and teachers were working on what can be made and thought. Design is a future-oriented activity. Designers produce visions of a different, better, or indeed apocalyptic future. They are utopians, dystopians, future speculators. Through their efforts, they realize a desired future or show the possibilities, dangers, and limitations thereof. Providing specific knowledge and expertise that can enhance the workshop model becomes increasingly important as a society and its production systems become more complex. Outside of art education in the 1960s and 70s, that led to the first forms of design research. Research aimed at organizing complicated design processes in the best possible way. A necessity in the post-war industrial mass production and large-scale building and infrastructure projects. But these are areas in which art education has never felt comfortable. Thus, the methods developed there rarely found their way into the art academies. They continued to focus on a highly individual and intuitive design approach, artisanal methods, and the materials and technology-oriented methods of the Bauhaus. But anyone who wants to make meaningful work as a designer in our modern society can no longer rely solely on their own experience and intuition. In 2003, when Dorst sketched a portrait of the artist in 2015, he wrote, quote, "First-hand experience will be as important as ever, but it needs to be complemented with a real grasp of the issues in the connected world. If we underestimate the complexity and the subtlety of the networked world we live in, The thoughts and things we produce will be naive, based on gross simplifications and irrelevant to people in the real world. We need to keep abreast of the changes that technology is imposing on our culture and society. Artists and designers who fail to do so will end up being forced to turn their backs on the world, becoming pessimistic, conservative, or, worst of all, purely self-referential. The bricolaur trapped in his own eye. Dost and Lawson identify another important disadvantage of the workshop model. Because there are no generally recognized design theories, designers always have to make contextual work. They must be able to act situationally and strategically. That is, a designer must know how to determine which knowledge, skills, acquired methods and experiences he can apply in any situation. The meaning and usefulness of a design can only be truly tested in the complex reality. The workshop can only be a very limited reflection thereof. One of the main reasons for me to do a follow-up study at the university was that I wanted to discover which universally applicable design theories are available for designers. Much of what is described as design theory turns out to be mainly a manifestation of an ideology. At the start of my PhD research, I still asked myself, do theories exist for designers that have retained their value to contemporary design education, regardless of its historical context? One of the important conclusions of my dissertation is that the teaching of theory on design courses at art academies, whether or not this has generally applicable values, is largely an ideological choice. A choice that is based primarily on the profile of the artist appointed by the academy or course to teach its students. Cultural sociologist Jacob van der Tas obtained his PhD in 1990, was a study in which he made an explicit connection between the teaching of artists and theorizing. He defined 3 types of artists based on the relationship that an artist or designer enters into with his audience, in the form of, for instance, clients or buyers, such as religious and secular authorities, commercial companies, and individuals. The first type, the distanced artist or bohemian, attaches little value to this relationship and even ignores or denies it. This artist wants to see his artistic creation as separate from the wishes, demands, and personal preference of clients, observers, or consumers. He claims artistic autonomy for his practice, which is based primarily on an innate talent. Thus he does not need to learn much. He demands space and freedom to allow his talent to come fruition. His educational domain is the Meisterklasse, a teaching model developed in the 19th century under the influences of German Romanticism. In the master studio, the student is permitted to witness the coming and going of an artistic genius. In contrast, we have the dependent type, also referred to by Van der Tas as the craftsman, who is subservient to his public, sharing the values of that public and visualizing and symbolizing these values on the basis of his artistic ability. The theoretical education is focused on training skills and learning a widely recognizable, objective symbolic formal language. This involved instrumental knowledge that as previously outlined, is transferred above all through imitatio. The craft workshop is the most important educational domain for this dependent type. The third type, the professional artist, is independent and seeks an equal relationship with his public, based on his own specific field of knowledge and skills. It is this type of artist or designer that in the 19th century learned the doctrine of ornamentation at the craft schools of Amsterdam, The Hague, and Rotterdam. The principles of the Gestalt psychology at the Bauhaus, the principles of visual rhetoric and product semantics at the Hochschule für Gestaltung Ulm, and the product analysis of Wim Gillis at the Academy for Industrial Design, Eindhoven. Design theories, all of which are discursive in nature and can therefore be taught in the design classroom. When I look back on my training in Arnhem with this knowledge, I recognize many aspects of a distanced educational model. In the 80s, under the influence of Italian design, the designer was increasingly seen as an artist and design as a form of art. Art and design come together in a highly conceptual approach in which the power of the visualized idea is more important than the craftsmanship of the realization. The orientation towards knowledge derived from the properties of materials and production techniques largely disappears. The creative spirit of the individual becomes the focus on this. Becomes the focus, and this is at odds with generally accepted design principles or the learning of handicraft instructions. The postmodern thinking made the Bauhaus a period-specific and arbitrary style. It denied the scientific basis and experience of designers that were the foundations for the form and color theories. I only outline briefly a part of my research here. The most important observation I wish to mention here is that theory and research can only play an important role when academies have the intentions to connect the I with the we. Between do and think, the designer must develop a strategy on how he designs and researches. Between I and we, the question is asked why and for whom he designs and researches. Those who remain close to the I as a designer do not need to justify themselves to the we. In the domestic and communal space, I and we are still strongly linked and they implicitly understand each other. In the civil and market space, the relationship between the two requires a language or a theory to make the correct and desired connection between designer and producer, between designer and client, and between designer and public. The fact that the Bauhaus was the first design school in which the embodied knowledge of the workshop was enriched with design theory is a direct result of the ideological decision to connect the designer with his public. In 2009, the then director of the Bauhaus Dessau Foundation, Philip Oswald, formulated an answer to the question of the current relevance of this design school. According to him, the Bauhaus is essentially, quote, a radical experiment in the breaking down of boundaries, in the decategorization, and no metaphor described it more aptly than that of space in flux. Bauhaus is maximum dynamic instability, change. The Bauhaus was a laboratory for the exploration of a new realm of possibility that took shape with the new knowledge, the new technologies, and the new ways of thinking that were emerging at that time. End of quote. And the most important goal of that was to improve the quality of everyday life. Nearly 100 years after the emergence of the Bauhaus, the radical experiment and the decategorization appears to be inconvenient in the merging of an art academy with a craft school and in forging a new unity between art and technology. The challenge today lies in the connection between art schools and universities, with the aim of improving the quality of our everyday environment. More and more art academies collaborate with universities, mostly initiated by the professorships responsible for designing the theory and research for the universities of applied sciences. In his 2050 portrait of the artist, Dorst observed that there are various possibilities and even major contradictions in bringing together artists and scientists. Scientists strive to develop objective knowledge, quote of Dorst, while the decisions that artists and designers take in their projects are of a fundamentally subjective nature. This could be a real obstacle to arriving at a fruitful and more intimate relationship. End of quote. During a recently held presentation of research projects that were accepted for the NWO research called Research Through Design, moderator Dorst stressed the duality between research and design and all of the associated assumptions and image forming, such as the difference between fundamental and applied research, the finding of truth versus the creation of meaning, and knowledge that can be generalized versus knowledge that is only applicable in a unique context-related design situation. The categorization of research and determination of who actually performs science have an institutional and political importance. It's about the awarding of degrees, academic status, and access to research fundings. We can also keep the question simple, as Koen Verbraak does in his interviews with top scientists such as Robert Dijkgraaf, Louise Fresco, Frans de Waal, and Hans Clevers. He asked them, what is science? And the answers were quite uniform and can be summarized as a systematic and transparent search by curious professionals for answers to the question of how humans and the world function. This search, however, is not limited to academic scientists. Artists and designers also perform systematic and transparent research of the world and thereby encounter new insights and knowledge. Christopher Frame, author of the article Research in Art and Design, noted that the tension between research and design was situated to a large extent in the prefix re. Research, searching for something again, presupposes a search for something that is already there. Art, craft, and design, by contrast, search for the new and not yet existing, according to Frame. In recent years, numerous publications have appeared to seek to make a distinction between artistic, design-based, and scientific research. In these, the term abduction is used frequently as a third kind of logic, along with education and dedication. Well, dedication and education belongs to the domain of science. Abduction is characteristic of the design world. It is about producing new representations and speculations. To make the research into the future less abstract, futurologist Stuart Candy defined different forms of future. Every vision of the future represents a probable future. After all, you never know for sure if and when new things can be realized and materialized and will be used. Because you don't know the future, he speaks of many possible futures. In addition to a probable future, one of the possible futures can be identified is a desired future. An example of a desired future is the utopia, an ideal world that is, however, unachievable. Candy attaches great importance to artists and designers working on desirable futures, because these, in combination with a probable future, determine the plausible future that we, however that may be, would like and are able to achieve in all probability. After my study in Leiden, I conclude that research for designers would be more beneficial at a university of the arts. That's the reason why I was jealous on José's jobs. The Bauhaus model already taught us that the decategorization can occur when people work on the basis of a collectively formulated social purpose. The engineer and the bricklayer, the scientist and the designer, now seem to have found each other again, based on the question of how today's world, the spaceship Earth, with its finite amount of replaceable fuel and resources, could and must function better in the future. A spectacular example is the research through design project Symbiotic Machines for Space Exploration, a collaboration between, among others, scientist Raoul Frese and artist Ivan Henriques. Frese is developing organic solar cells based on photosynthesis. Together with Henriques, he's working on autonomous robots that search in water for algae that can be used in the solar cells. Both are currently examining whether these robots can be further developed into machines that can work independently to build the first settlement on Mars. But our own projects at the Center of Expertise Future Makers also show that designers and scientists, in a concerted effort for a more sustainable and circular society, are conducting valuable research into new materials and applications for hemp, mycelium, and algae in textile and carpet production. My PhD research taught me something else. During my search of the archives of the Dutch art academies, I got to see many design assignments and the results thereof. The majority related to objects for the domestic landscape of everyday life: furniture, lighting, tableware, cutlery, clothing, footwear, jewelry, fashion accessories, books, and interior design. More complex objects such as electrical equipment or machinery are exceptions. This can be explained in part by the history of the Dutch art academies, almost all of which emerged from the 19th century craft schools, with a tradition that left little room for industrial mass production, electrical equipment or cars and bicycles. Ethical motives plays no small role in this. The noble handicraft was regarded as more important than industrial design. Art and craft education has always had a close relationship with the decor and furnishing of the private home environment, with the utensils it contains, and with clothing, because these represent the world from which people largely derived their identity. In the mid-70s, the then director of the Eindhoven Academy, Wim Gillis, surveyed the products that designers were engaged with. Based on the personal bond that people have with a product and the influence of its outward appearance on how the user values it, he distinguished ich ferne and ich nah products. Products that are far from the eye are, for example, professional machines, public transportation and engineering structures. Products that are close to the eye include fashionable items such as clothing and shoes, furniture and interior furnishing. The Eindhoven Academy, which positioned itself as the first school for industrial design in Europe at that time, wanted to appropriate the whole area from Eijnde to Eijnde products. According to Gillis, the design courses at the Dutch art academies, partly based on their historic roots in craft education, could then engage in the design of the Eijnde products. The professorship E-SCAPE should not, in my opinion, ignore these roots. It concerns a tradition with knowledge and experience in the design of the home environment that is not or hardly available outside of art education. The professorship can build upon this and develop an art-based research within the unique biotope of ArtEZ. The fact that ArtEZ is the only institute in the Netherlands that had courses and professorships in the field of interior architecture, fashion and product design, and furthermore has the expertise of, for instance, interaction designers, choreographers and composers at its disposal, makes this institute a unique research environment. The first discussions about the new this new professorship took place under the working title Exploring the New Domestic Landscape. The title E-SCAPE may be regarded as an abbreviation thereof, although its meaning is much broader. The title refers to the 1972 exhibition Italy, the New Domestic Landscape at MoMA, New York. Several Italian designers and architects, including Sozzas, presented their radical visions of the domestic landscape of the future in the form of physical installations. Unencumbered by demands and requirements from the industry, they showed that changing lifestyles, current notions of private and public spaces, and new materials and production methods requires a different living environment. Design was no longer about the design of a beautiful collection of utensils for the consumer market, but about researching the existential problems and possibilities of the domestic space. In the free space that curator Emilio Ambas offered designers, Sozzas could again be the designer he was as a little boy, a bricoleur making objects in a meaningful community, instead of an engineer of office chairs, typewriters and calculators in the name of a multinational for an anonymous public. A research space requires a certain freedom. A freedom such as I described previously for the domestic and communal space. Thus you could also read E-SCAPE as escape. A place to escape from everything that hinders the freedom to research. But you will understand that good research cannot be done without the input from the civil space and the market space. Theory and research actually developed in the tension between the freedom to ask questions and to give possible answers to social challenges. It is my belief that students, teachers and designers benefit from a confrontation between their personal motives and the actual world. Not as dependent or distanced designers, but as professionals who are able to substantiate what, why and for whom they bring something new into the world. Gielen regards the increasing pressure from the market space on the communal space of art education as a direct threat to the unstructured freedom, the possibility to fail, and the experimental processes that do not lead directly to marketable products. But for the research of professorships, this connection with the world can also be an improvement. Social and economic challenges feed and inspire the necessary discourse and challenge the imagination of the designer. You may also read the E as the E of an investigation into the essentials of the human living and working landscape. At the 2040 Architecture Biennale in Venice, Rem Koolhaas presented an investigation into the fundamentals, the essential elements that make up our architecture, such as the wall, facade, window, ceiling, door, fireplace, and not to mention the toilet. Essentials that the human body constantly has to relate to. Elements that will always be part of our home environment, but that will also always have to be reinvented under the influence of economic, cultural, and technological change. At the other hand of the spectrum, the E stands for an electronic and digital landscape. Electronics have been forcing their way into our homes for some time already. E-SCAPE could also have been called I-SCAPE. Electronics gives us interactive environments, interfaces, and the Internet of Things. Our environment is becoming even smarter. Technological utopians predict a smart future in which humankind is provided with all the comforts. Comforts relate not only to practical work, but also to our well-being as a homo semioticus. What are the aesthetic and the ethical consequences of a world that is digitizing at a frantic pace? A well-known advertisement for a telecom provider uses the slogan, "Not because you have to, because you can." Technologically, we can do an incredible amount, but do we want to? Many scientific research programs focus on questions concerning technological developments, smart culture, smart industry, smart cities. A designer who also thinks about an ethic of working and living might sooner ask the question, what do we do when we can do all this? On the basis of what I have outlined so far, I hope it is clear that the professorship represents a type of research that stems from the tradition of art education and is largely based on the embodied knowledge of the craft practice, on the addictive and speculative thinking of designers, and on their critical and ethically motivated questions. A form of design research into products and spaces from which people derive their identity, which constantly shifts between the personal motivations of individual designers and the question that a society in transition poses them. Not to provide an alternative to everything that science and technology already make possible, but to enrich this from an artistic design perspective. The precise label that this research will acquire is less interesting to me. In the discussion about a form of art-based research, frequent references are made to the three-way division described by Freyling: research into, research for, and research through art and design. For research into art and design, the artifacts are studied from the existing scientific perspectives, for instance, historical, technological, or economical. This is the terrain of the classical university research. Research that will always remain important for designers, but it is not so directly useful for an investigation in which designing and making are central. Research for and through design is more useful for this. Research for design includes all forms of study that a designer conducts to realize his idea. That may range from materials research to the collection of visual materials as inspiration for the eventual work. Freyling calls it research with a small r, because its meaning does not go beyond its usefulness for an individual creative process. For professorships in art education, the research through design is more interesting. This concerns, for example, research into new materials or material applications for the development of more sustainable value chains of products and services. This also includes materialized future models in the form of prototypes and visual statements that are tested in specific scientific or public context and so-called cultural props. Constructive design researchers refine Freyling's concept by stating that this research through art and design can only be done well if something is actually constructed in the form of a product, system, a space, or medium. A method with which art education has long been familiar. At the University of Technology Eindhoven, constructive design research is promoted by Professor of Industrial Design Caroline Hummels as a form of phenomenological research that focuses on the physical experience of making and using products. In my opinion, it is no coincidence that this former student of the Arnhem Art Academy introduced this method into the highly technological-oriented environment of the TU Eindhoven. The professorship E-SCAPE will focus on 3 lines of research in the coming years. The first is called Speculative Spaces. Speculative or critical design is a term that was coined in the mid-90s. Critical design aims to offer an alternative to the affirmative design that developed in the 20th century. Among other things, affirmative design is problem-solving, production-oriented, of service to the industry, and innovative. It focuses on the consumer and functions in the context of how the world is today. Critical design, on the other hand, is problem-seeking, discussion-oriented, of service to society, and provocative. It focuses on the citizen and function in the context of how the world could be. Critical design is open and prefers to connect with hopes and dreams rather than plans and destinations. But because it is a form of constructive design research, the fleeting nature of dreams and hope is anchored in the world, in earthly material, and linked to the human body. This involves strategies derived from and related to the arts. The working methods of speculative designers is more exploratory than scientific. With their results, they challenge science. They function as discussion items and offer new perspectives on the wicked problems of our society. Speculative designers create new visions of desirable or undesirable futures themselves, or in collaboration with experts from the arts and science. They are materialized thought experiments which extrapolate current events into a still unknown future, or conversely, make the as yet unthinkable something that can be thought and experienced. Critical design is strongly driven by the eye, the personal motivation of the designer artist, and his ideas about the world are central. But his work only becomes meaningful in the we, the social debate that he seeks by showing the work in the public space, the civil space of galleries, museums, and internet, among others. That is what constructive design researchers call the showroom, space in which design, art, and science meet and become public. The aim of this professorship is to further examine this type of research through the showroom, to make it explicit and demonstrate its social values. The professorship's second line of research is called smart living. Here, researchers explicitly seek to connect with the relevant stakeholders in the value chain, from raw material suppliers and producers to retailers, end users, and recyclers. The most important research space here is the field, the market space of the research, where the materialized concepts can be tested in their intended context. The basis of this is Future Makers, the center of expertise established by ArtEZ, which, in collaboration with businesses, governments, and research institutes, engage in the development and application of sustainable materials and production technology in the field of textiles, fashion, and interior design. The designer is a reflective practitioner who is not in a classical relationship with the client, a relationship in which he unilaterally shares his knowledge. On the contrary, here the experiences of customers, clients, consumers, or citizens is seen as an important and unique source of knowledge for the professional, which he can continue to reflect upon and anticipate throughout the design process. So interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary cooperation means not only that there is a connection between the various academic and or artistic knowledge domains. The knowledge and experiences of the public are also involved in the design process. The design process is therefore not dominated by the I, but by the we. That requires a common language which is formed in the do, on the basis of perceptible interventions in the form of sketches, models, and prototypes, or through virtual and augmented reality. A language is created that places the sensory experience central. The critical, ethical attitude of the designer also plays a role in the field. Designers will tackle the questions of whether smart serves purely economic interest or also contributes to a sustainable, inclusive, and human society. There has long been a tendency for consumers to take the initiative and make themselves responsible for their own smart, or better to say, sustainable living environment. This ranges from small-scale local food production and cultivation to new digital production possibilities with the 3D printers. In this development, designers are less the providers of ready-made products and mainly the facilitators of production processes. This both the old knowledge of artisanal production and new technology, the domestic landscape is increasingly becoming a private, local production environment. Not only because the house itself is again a place of production, but also because people exert ever more influence on production processes of the industry from their own home. The professorship aims to explore the possibilities of the home as a workplace, both by research through design and through a cultural and design historical study of home production. An important question is what the role of the professionally trained designer can be in this. The last line of research is called Exploring the Communal Space. Now, the teaching space is itself the subject of study. A free space in which the professorship, together with the courses in product design and interior architecture, among others, will examine where interesting connections can be made between education and research and between the communal space on the one hand and the market space and civil space on the other. Ultimately, this revolves around the question of what a school that intends to train the professional designer researcher should look like. In this context, I would like to share with you the image that philosopher Villain Flusser described in his essay, The Factory, about the School of the Future. Flusser contends that whoever wants to learn about the past, present and future has to study the factory, a word he uses for the production workshops in a particular culture. Science, politics, art, religion of a society are all contained in the organization of these human production workshops. So whoever wants to know the future must ask how the factory of the future functions. Based on essential changes in the location and organization of the factory, Flusser identified 4 historical periods, namely those in which people make things by hand, by tools, by machines, and by robots. He defines making as an activity whereby available materials are converted into something that benefits humankind. For that making, tools, machines, and robots are extensions of the hands. A factory is the geographic location where the available material is transformed with these tools. But it is also the place where the 3 industrial revolutions occurred, which formed a new type of humans. The handman, the toolman, the machine man, and the robot man. In the process that Flusser outlines, the human changes more and more from a natural to an artificial being, whereby the person-to-person transfer of experience is increasingly replaced by acquired descriptive knowledge. In this process, the relationship between humans and technology and the importance of the location also change. The handman is nomadic. His factory can be anywhere as natural production has no fixed location. Like the handman, the toolman, the working man, is still the constant factor in the production process. The tool is replaced when it is worn or broken. The factory is bound to a location, namely where the best raw materials can be found for making the tools. With the machine man, a radical shift occurs. The owner of the machine and the machine itself are now the constant factor. The sick or the worn-out human, the laboring man, is replaced. The factories are concentrated where the knowledge, expertise and resources are available to make the machine. But what about the robot man? According to Flusser, we have to examine the differences between the tool, the machine and the robot. He calls a tool empirical. It originates from the experience of human creativity. A machine is mechanical and it is built on the basis of scientific principles from mathematics, physics, and chemistry. Robots are neurophysiological and biological and are thus closer to the natural state of the handman. But there is a fundamental difference. The robot no longer requires a direct relationship with humans and can function anywhere in a digitally connected world. The factory of the robot man can be located anywhere. Just as the factory of the handman was nomadic, the factory of the robot man has become that again. Maybe you might ask yourself what all this means for education. You learn to use a tool through experience, learning by doing. A machine requires theoretical training, a basic training to learn how to operate a machine, a secondary education to learn how to repair and maintain a machine, and higher education to learn how to build new machines. Robots, however, require an abstract way of learning. How do you connect people to the network of factories that are called robots? And then, Flusser writes, And then Flusser writes, this provides a hint as to what factories in the future will look like schools, in fact. Thus, in case of the factory of the future, we will have to think more in terms of scientific laboratories, art academies, and libraries and collections of recordings than in terms of present-day factories. Whereas the Bauhaus advocated the school of the factory from the machine age, Flusser paints us a picture of a robot age in which the factory is a school. Again, history creates its own mirror image, in which the craftsman designer, that was the foundation for the Bauhaus, emancipates himself as a critical scientific design researcher. Or as Flusser says, and we shall have to look upon the robot man of the future more as an academic than as a craftsman, worker or engineer. Flusser concludes by saying that his factory as a school seems like a contradiction in terms. The classical image of the factory, in which humans have to give up their freedom, is at odds with the school as a sanctuary for contemplation and study. But this classic contradiction, created by romantics as a response to the culture of the machine man, disappears when machines become robots and the factory an applied school. Quote Flusser, such factory schools and school factories are coming into existence everywhere. I hope that the professorship E-SCAPE can contribute to the creation of these design factories for the robot man, where not just the artist, but everyone is once again a worker instead of a laborer. Thank you.